Here's the final moment of the Indianapolis Regionals.
Oh my god, Miraidon has the speed advantage. How much is Discharge gonna do?
Oh.
Electric Terrain boosted, Hadron Engine boosted, Terra Electric boosted, Choice Specs boosted, Discharge isn't enough damage! It
It didn't even need the double protect, but Miraidon claims its first championship in Regulation G. Rajan Ball.
Rajan and his triple electric move Miraidon won the entire tournament. But entering the tournament, you wouldn't have expected this to happen. Believe it or not, Miraidon wasn't getting a lot of respect. People looked at it as good, but not great. Take a look at the usage rates of the tournament. Miraidon was only the number 5 restricted Pokemon. Entering the tournament, 91% of people would have rather used a different legendary. The current format started this month and is Regulation G, a format that allows you to bring one restricted legendary Pokemon per team. It's the first of its kind for Generation 9. This creates a very intriguing dilemma. Your restricted legendary is going to be by and far the best Pokemon on the field. As such, choosing the right legendary is incredibly important. Why was Miraidon so underestimated? Why did it end up so dominant? And why did it have 3 electric type moves? Miraidon is known for one thing, its sheer power. It's an electric type Pokemon who sets up electric terrain, whose ability gives it extra power when in that electric terrain, and who has relatively strong electric type moves including a signature move, Electro Drift. And on top of that, the winner of the tournament used Terra Electric. Off of a base 135 special attack, that is a threat to one-hit KO literally any Pokemon, even Pokemon that resisted. That is one of the reasons why you use Miraidon. Sheer unadulterated power. You don't really understand what that means unless you see it in action. For example, a Terra Electric Volt Switch cleanly one-hit KOs Incineroar. That is unimaginable to do that much damage on an attack that isn't even super effective. Electro Drift isn't actually the key move for Miraidon, it's Volt Switch. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The ceiling is very clear. If you can take advantage of Miraidon, you KO everything. However, as you may know, power isn't everything, and it's why Miraidon was underestimated. First of all, there's the opportunity cost of not being Calric Shadow. Opportunity cost is an extremely relevant concept in a restricted legendary format. When you use Miraidon, or any legendary for that matter, you are not using Calric Shadow or Calric's Ice, broken legendaries in their own right. Calric Shadow emerged as one of the top restricted legendaries of the format. It is faster than Miraidon, still extremely strong, has a signature move that is a spread move which targets both opponents, and it gains special attack on every kill. And on top of all of that, it's immune to Fake Out. If you're going for the fast special attacker archetype, why not Calric Shadow? But even more, there's Grassy Surge Rillaboom. Look at the usage rates. Rillaboom is on 1/3 of teams, and Rillaboom is a direct counteracting force to Miraidon. Whenever you use Miraidon, you're going to have to deal with Rillaboom, an extremely common Pokemon, switching in and removing the source of your power. It's definitely not unwinnable. For example, Draco Meteor can KO non-Assault Vest Rillaboom, but it does beg the question. Why use a legendary that is going to have inherent issues with a common meta Pokemon? Again, Calric Shadow is right there. And there's also Raging Bolt. Raging Bolt is a statistical monster and is honestly almost like a restricted Pokemon itself. When you use Miraidon, Raging Bolt becomes redundant, so you wouldn't pick it. So when you pick Miraidon, you're using one restricted legendary, meanwhile your opponent gets their legendary and Raging Bolt. The gap between Miraidon and Raging Bolt is smaller than the gap between another restricted legendary Pokemon and its analog. You could even argue that Miraidon's competition is Raging Bolt, not Calric Shadow. These 3 Pokemon really limit Miraidon. But this triple electric Miraidon did win the tournament, and here's how it did it. Electro Drift is your nuke button and it will one-hit KO anything, and Draco Meteor is there to hit the Pokemon you can't touch like Raging Bolt. But the deceptively key move is actually Volt Switch. Terra Electric Volt Switch KOs a surprising amount of Pokemon, and the real asset is that it allows you to switch around your Pokemon to escape danger. Doing damage while switching is fundamentally broken, and Volt Switch is arguably Miraidon's best move. Ordinarily, there's a trade-off. Your switch move is weaker, and that's the cost you pay for gaining the benefit of switching. But Miraidon is so strong that its weaker move gets the knockout anyway. It isn't exposed to the vulnerability of staying on the battlefield, it kills something and you pivot to a better matchup. This is an aspect of Miraidon that was overlooked. If you looked at Miraidon from the point of view of, wow, strong Electro Drift, you would have been interested and then you would have moved on because you realized it wasn't enough. And you'd be correct, having one strong move isn't enough. But when you stick around to find the practical value of attacking and switching at the same time, you would have seen what makes Miraidon so good. The Terra Electric OHKO and Switch combo is tournament winning. It really comes in handy when fighting against Rillaboom, for example. It gives you ways to switch out and switch back in later to reset electric terrain. Then the final move is another high value innovation, Discharge. Discharge is a move that you almost never see. The main problem is that it hits everyone on the field, including your partner Pokémon. You can play around it with ground type partner Pokémon and protect, but threatening to hit yourself is always awkward. But with Miraidon, what if that's actually okay? The upside is that you solve one of Miraidon's weaknesses, that unlike Caloric Shadow, you can only target one Pokémon at a time. The downside is that you have to be extremely careful when you use a move that can hit your partner. That's a move that most people would overlook, but is actually deadly when played right. Early game you could spam Volt Switch, and in the late game you could clean up with Discharge. But again, you do have to make sure you're not KOing your own Pokemon when you do that. This is what made a lot of people underestimate Miraidon. They underestimated Volt Switch. On paper, when you look at Miraidon, you see a Pokemon with fundamental flaws. But in practice, you can outposition your opponents and you can leverage huge damage outputs into threatening positions. What does your opponent do when you threaten to OHKO Rillaboom with Draco Meteor and threaten to simply Volt Switch and come back later? It's tricky, and through those complications you create a lot of pressure. The second reason it performed well was because it was anti-meta. Caloric Shadow is a truly dominant Pokemon, and every team is stacking multiple dark or normal type Pokemon just to have a chance. It is rightfully over-prepared for. In fact, this Miraidon team literally had 2 normal type Pokemon and an Assault Vest Incineroar. On the other hand, no one is really stacking multiple ground types on their team. In fact, there's not many ground types to begin with. Iron Treads is bad, Landorus is out of favor, Groudon is out of favor, and the only real ground type is Ursaluna. Take a look at the top 8 of the tournament. There's only 2 people with a ground type Pokemon, and funnily enough, they're both Miraidon players. These metagame factors are relevant, and if Miraidon was more on the radar, we would have definitely seen more ground type Pokemon being used. But Miraidon was anti-meta and took advantage of the trends. Looking at Rajan's team, you can see a lot of the thought that went into it. For example, Miraidon is paired with Tailwind, Focus Sash, Whimsicott. That's a pretty straightforward idea. You want Miraidon to outspeed everything and get one-hit KOs, so you want Tailwind. But why did he pick Whimsicott instead of Prankster Tornadus, the more popular Tailwind Pokemon? The reason is because Whimsicott has a much better matchup into Raging Bolt. Also, Whimsicott has Prankster Encore, which can lock opponents into their moves. That's really good versus Calm Mind Raging Bolt, for example. It's also valuable for maneuvering through Pokemon using Protect because you can perma-lock them into that move. Pokemon are going to be protecting a lot in front of a Miraidon. Then there's Electric Seed Farigiraf, which gains defense next to Miraidon. The key value addition of Farigiraf is that it stops priority moves like Fake Out. That is one of Miraidon's key vulnerabilities. Unlike Caloric Shadow, it doesn't have the Ghost type, which means it easily gets disrupted by Fake Out Incineroar. Not anymore. Farigiraf with Trick Room also turns the table on opposing Trick Room teams, notably Caloric's Ice, one of the best legendaries in the format. To boot, it even has Helping Hand to support even more Miraidon destruction. With Whimsicott for Tailwind and Farigiraf to fight Trick Room, you set the foundation for Miraidon to fight with the support of Speed Control. Then there's an Ogerpon Rock, one of the more uncommon Ogerpon forms. Usually teams prefer Water or Fire, but here it does a couple of things. One is that it prevents the team from falling into a little bit of a trap. Oftentimes, people get carried away and rely on their restricted legendary for all the power output, and when that happens, sometimes they have too many support Pokemon. Ogerpon gives a physically attacking presence to the team, and its rock typing helps offensively versus Caloric's Ice and defensively versus Terrapagos, 2 of the top restricted Pokemon. But even though it's an offensive Pokemon, it can still support the team with Follow Me to redirect attacks off of Miraidon. And last but not the least, it has the Sturdy ability, which is generally good, but it's a special help for Miraidon. When you operate with this Volt Switch spam attack, you do need Pokemon to come into the game after the Volt Switch and be exposed to potential damage. Its resource management and Focus Sash on Whimsicott and Sturdy on Ogerpon gives you additional switch-in ideas. Then there's an Ursaluna Blood Moon, a ground type for Discharge spam, and a total nuke of a Wall Breaker to fill the role of the secondary attacker. A very underestimated aspect of electric terrain is electric terrain. Unfortunately, there aren't many good Paradox Pokemon who benefit from electric terrain. The best Paradox beneficiary of electric terrain is Iron Bundle, who gains a speed boost, but most other Iron Pokemon aren't relevant. But the other use of electric terrain is that it makes Pokemon immune to Spore. Electric terrain gives you the added benefit of shutting down a lot of what Amoonguss wants to do, which is invaluable. Notably, Farigiraf plus Ursaluna Blood Moon is a fantastic Trick Room core, but it struggles with Amoonguss, who underspeeds both of them and can Spore. Not anymore. Miraidon gives you that team building freedom to build around cores that ordinarily would have struggled with Amoonguss. And finally, there's an Assault Vest Incineroar, who is always valuable with its disruption with Fake Out and good matchup into Rillaboom and Calric Shadow. It doesn't need to use safety goggles because it can bet on having electric terrain support. With Intimidate and AV, it too is an effective switch-in after a Volt Switch, as well as generally being the best non-restricted Pokemon in the format. You can see how the team synergizes to highlight Miraidon's strengths and fix its weaknesses. The metagame will continue to develop and people will respect Miraidon. Undoubtedly, people will adapt. Which legendary do you think will be the next to get the spotlight? Will Miraidon repeat, or maybe Calyrex will take over? Let me know down below.